All right, the Audit and Compliance Committee, October for the Board of Regents will please come to order.
That's fine.
Well, let's see, I thought Regent McMillan had something to keep us awake after sitting through a 3-hour meeting, and now we have another hour and a half to go. So,
Unfortunately, I'm not going to demonstrate my pom-pom skills.
all right. I'd like to welcome and recognize our student representatives, and Allie Euland and Ann Barnes. And will you just tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, hi. Well, I'm Allie Euland, as you said. I'm a student at the Duluth campus. I'm a senior majoring in marketing and minoring in communication. This is my second year as a representative.
All right. And Ms. Barnes?
Thank you. My name is Ann Barnes. I'm a PhD candidate in higher education in the Department of Organizational Leadership, Policy, and Development. And I'm in my 4th and final year.
All right. Well, welcome to both of you. We'll be interested in hearing from both of you. We are going to take the item slightly out of order on the here because of different people wanting to come in and out and being present, and President Kaler wants to be here for part of the meeting. So item number 1 will come in 2 parts, half at the beginning of the meeting and half at the end. And then we will move to item 3 will be number 2, and item 2 will be 3rd. And anyway, we'll move through the agenda. So the first one, we have half of the internal audit update by Chief Auditor Klatt.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, members of the committee. We're going to split this into what is going to be my normal periodic update for the committee. And what will follow at the end is the follow-up discussion members of the committee wanted to have on our discussion at the last meeting on the landscape of internal audit findings. So that's how we're breaking this up. So in terms of our normal reporting to the audit committee, on page 5 of your docket material, there's a dashboard on the status of the audit plan. And Regent McMillan, you have asked several times, where do I get information about whether you're making progress appropriately on the plan? And this is the page. And as you can see in the dial for progress against the plan, we are positioned very well. And I currently don't foresee the need to make any changes to the plan that we reviewed with the committee in June. And if something does transpire that creates that need, we will of course report that to the audit committee at the next earliest opportunity. On page 6 of your docket material are our follow-up results. And in this follow-up period, we had a 34% implementation rate of outstanding essential audit recommendations. This is slightly below the 40% we like, but we've had a really nice trend for the last 6 or 7 reporting periods of 40 and even into the 50%. So I'm not particularly concerned about it at this time. We'll just watch that trend and hopefully it will tick up again. 5 units completed their action plans. There are no recommendations past 2 years. Committee members have inquired of me of the status of recommendations in 2 particular units. The School of Dentistry, it has two outstanding audit recommendations, and both of those involve their private practice plan. I will tell you, I have been at the university for almost 25 years, and I think with the exception of a month or 2, there has always been outstanding recommendations in the School of Dentistry regarding their practice plan. It's been a very difficult situation. They've implemented, I believe, 3 plans. None of them have been particularly successful. And now they are currently looking at those plans again. Dr. Toller is engaged in that effort with the School of Dentistry. And I would just tell you, my expectation is this will be a continued item on this report for an unforeseen period of time. The other unit that Regents have inquired about is admissions. Most of their outstanding recommendations are directly related to their implementation of a new admissions system called SLATE. And once that system is operational, which they believe will be this month, although they won't start actually using it to process admissions until next fall. But it will be in place, and then they can start working on their processes and some of the policy issues, et cetera, that are also embedded in the outstanding recommendations. So I expect we will continue to see progress on that. And the fact that it's tied to a system implementation, those always are those items that take longer to get addressed. So any questions on follow-up results before I move on?
Regent McMillan.
Chair Cohen, thank you very much for this. You're right, I have asked often and with sincerity and commitment around this matching of resources versus available resources versus the demands, needs, and requirements of the institution. So I especially like the little thing that combines a heat map with a speedometer. I don't know what you call that, a heatometer, I'm not sure, but it's, you know, as I get more comfortable with this and learn, you know, how you make those assessments, that's a good place to look. And I assume my question is, as you calibrate that arrow, like the one time spent on activities being a little less, so it's in the green, can you give me just a little color about how you do that? Is that a sense of sitting down with your full team? Is it, how do you figure out where that arrow goes? You know?
Well, we are a very time/effort conscious group because our time is our asset. And so we track our time very carefully. When we prepare our plan, we assign hours to those audits. We look at how that time is being applied to individual activities, and that gives us a very reliable assessment of how are we making progress against that plan.
Good. Well, again, the main comment is just one of quality and appreciation, and Chair Cohen's predecessor, Regent Broad, always spoke highly of how you do this, and now I'm getting a firsthand opportunity, and thank you.
All right.
Well done.
Moving on page 16 is our quarterly result, or it's not really tri-annually results. We have 12 audits that are currently in process, and during this period, we worked on 5 matters of an investigative nature. We completed 12 audits. Those are detailed in charts and commentary on pages 18 to 23 of your docket material. 11 of those 12 audits resulted in assessments of good, which is a great percentage. And 8 of those audits had resulted in no essential recommendations. The remaining 3 audits had only 7 essential recommendations associated with those. So that's really excellent outcomes from an audit standpoint. One audit, the employment eligibility verification audit, was assessed as needing improvement and resulted in essential recommendations, and you'll be receiving more information on that audit and the management actions being taken as a result later in this meeting. I do want to point your attention to pages 24 and 25. Over the last, I don't know, 9 months or so, within the audit function, we embarked on what we call SNAP audits, which is not an acronym. It stands for nothing, except it's a cool little name. And those are small audit efforts focused on a particular question or activity in which we can go in and assess it very quickly and give information back to business process owners so they can remediate potential problems before a formal audit effort happens. This is intended to ease administrative burden on the audit staff as well as the units being audited. And they are heavily reliant on data analytic procedures. And so we did, I believe there were 12. And they arise because we start seeing a trend in our other audit work on particular items, or we experience something in our own office that gives us raises questions about how something is operating. So I think they're very effective, and I expect we will continue to do them as we proceed. So we provided a little summary of the areas that we've looked at and what those results have been. And that concludes this portion, unless there are additional questions by members of the committee.
All right, thank you very much, and we'll hear from you again toward the end of the meeting. So, okay, on to our next item, which is the institutional risk profile, and Vice President Bertelsen, Vice President Kramer, and our Public Relations Officer, Chuck Tombarge. Welcome. Do you have any introductory remarks that you want to make?
Chair Cohen, this item was reflects the continuing interest of the committee on behalf of the entire board to continue to validate institutional risk profile as a reflection of the areas of risks that the board is interested in being informed about and ensuring mitigation plans exist. And so there was a desire to, again, get somewhat of a deeper dive into some of those mitigation plans so that the committee, again, continues to get assurance that this process reflects appropriate management of what's perceived to be high institutional risk.
Okay, and before we begin, welcome Provost Hanson. We're glad you're here with us, joining the committee for now. All right, I don't know which one of you want, okay. Vice President Bertelsen, you're going to kick this off.
I will. Thank you, Madam Chair, Regents. Today we're here to talk about the risk profiles we received last summer and our risk mitigation plans for both campus safety and for crisis response. And so I'll be talking about the first part, and then our friends in University Relations will be talking about the second part. I'd like to start by saying safety is a shared responsibility. Oftentimes we think about safety, we instantly think about cops and first responders. But frankly, of course, it starts dramatically before then. We want to avoid their need to even show up in a perfect world. But it's a comprehensive component of everyone's job here at the university. And so we think and plan systematically to prepare for, respond to, and recover from emergencies and other events which can cause impact to individual safety or plant or operations. All risk and incidents cannot be avoided, but some can be prevented, and most can be managed in ways to minimize their impact, and that's what we want to talk about, how we do that today. Essentially, this is the format, the foundation we want to use for this conversation is how do we think about risk mitigation, the prevention, that when there is an event, the incident management, and third, while we resolve that incident, how do we maintain operational continuity of the enterprise? So again, we can't eliminate risk, but we can create the structure. So we won't be addressing all the components that go into these, but we will be trying to give you some flavor of the kind of activities and efforts that go into each one of these criteria, each of these categories. When we think about risk mitigation, it consists of planning, implementation, and then the monitoring of the progress within that effort. So I just wanted to give you some examples of what falls into that. First is around training, and though it's not just about, it does include police emergency management staff training. We do a great deal of it because we don't know what of that planning and preparation may prevent bad things from happening. We know it does prevent some, but it's hard to quantify the things that don't occur. But the things that do, we want to be prepared for. All University Minnesota Police Department officers are trained in crisis intervention, event and crowd management, command training, joint training with Minneapolis and St. Paul and Ramsey County, across the whole array. So not just events that impact us, but where we need others to come and support us and help us as well. In addition, we do training for campus leaders and responders. It starts with the senior leadership of the university, and we will talk about some examples about how we do that. Another example is the Medical Reserve Corps, comprised of 1,200 students, staff, and faculty from several areas of campus. It's one of only a handful of MRCs in the country in a university setting and the largest in Minnesota. It provides a personal surge of people to implement response plans when necessary. It's not just the people, of course, that help prevent and manage through situations, the infrastructure that we create. It's the kind of buildings and how we design them. It's the landscape spaces. It's the physical things and all the set of tools that we put in our toolbox to be able to give us information about the campus and the situations that are going on and how we help alert people to those concerns. You can see examples of cameras, radios, digital signage, fire panel enunciations. All these are put into place to help mitigate the risk and give us more information. Of course, over time, these too age and need to be replaced, and we have a financial plan that we work to maintain and update those. For emergency preparedness, how about that? We have a broad set of plans in place to help us be prepared for a wide set of possible scenarios. So you can see on the sheet a few of them. It starts at the top with senior leadership training from Emergency Management Policy Committee. This represents leadership from across the system, across the entire state. And we meet on a routine basis to share our planning efforts and train ourselves in how we think ahead, how we plan through an event, and how we manage the recovery. In addition to that, the university has adopted NIMS, the National Incident Management System. This is a national effort of create a uniform language by which we understand and can work not just internally within the university using a prescribed structure and language, but also anytime other emergency response units from outside of the university need to be engaged, we are all using the same structure and incident management system and language that enables us to work seamlessly together. In addition to that, the emergency response teams are a resource for the university and a resource of the state of Minnesota. And finally, operational continuity plans are established to help continue operations through an emergency and plan for the return to normal activities following a disaster. Since 2013, emergency management has planned and implemented more than 36 major training exercises across the system. And you can see just a small sampling of those here. We do these at each of the campuses. This is something that's required through the Clery Act, but also part of our planning effort through our Department of Emergency Management in each of our sites, and try to train across a broad array of kind of activities that may occur. Of course, no actual event will perfectly line up with the training that we did, but the effort of doing the training and the exercise prepares us mentally and organizationally to adapt for when those real events happen. Safety, of course, as I said, has gone well beyond public safety. Unique to the university are risks due to our research and teaching at this institution. You can see the staff, through these kind of examples, work hard to mitigate risks in our labs and on our workplace. We do a lot of potentially dangerous work here, whether that be in volatile substances or on rooftops or on construction sites. There are significant regulatory and compliance issues in many of these areas. Ensuring that everyone is up to date on this appropriate training is a major effort. As I mentioned earlier, many of you are familiar with the Clery Act, the Jean Clery Disclosure of Campus Security and Reporting. The most visible part of that is the timely warning that you also receive. It is sent through campus-wide email to the university community for crimes that occur on university property or in areas adjacent to campus. Timely warnings are meant to inform the university community of threat to or an ongoing risk and enable the campus community to take action to protect themselves. In addition, you can see a list from other requirements from this act. Moving on to incident management. When things do happen, incident management is the second component of how we manage risk at the institution. And that involves, of course, facilities, equipment, people, process, and communication within a given organization structure. It starts with an emergency operation plan. You can see this bright yellow book, which I brought my copy of here. It's meant to be not ignored. This color will get your attention. There are many chapters and tabs that relate to all the kinds of activities, and there's a chapter for all things that we could imagine to possibly impact us. These kind of examples are a risk to a person or property or operational continuity. It can involve whether an individual health event, a laboratory explosion, a fire or a blizzard, hazardous material release, and many other possible scenarios. This emergency plan guides our response to these major emergencies on campus and conforms with state and federal planning requirements and outlines the responsibilities of a variety of departments across the university so that everyone knows exactly their role. Most importantly, it establishes a chain of command for decision-making during and after an emergency through the NIMS language and process that I referred to. If there is an event that grows to such a size or duration, it moves beyond just the incident and the incident command that happens on the site, so that we would open an emergency operations center. We have location and backup locations on not just this campus, but each of our campuses. Under a situation, again, this is not the incident command itself, but the overall coordination of that incident and all the implications that happened outside of it. What other resources may they need to have there? What communications do we need to bring to the rest of the campus or outside of the campus? What advanced planning do we need to have for the following hours, days, or weeks if it took that place? And what continuity and contingency planning do we need to be making? We do that through this sort of structure. As I said, here's an example of a uniform NIMS structure. Again, this is, of course, adapted each and every event if it is necessary to reflect the needs of that moment. And it's up to the officer of the day and the Emergency Operations Center then to establish that structure and bring in the necessary resources to respond. The university is a large place with lots of people. We have a health incident and health emergency response plan that helps the campus respond and our partners to move quickly, effectively, and efficiently to respond to health incidents. This has been used before for influenza, TB, measles, mumps, and a variety of other health concerns. And one example was a pandemic influence response used during the H1N1 pandemic with a response length of over 18 months that this plan was being put in place and put into operation. I'm going to end this section with an illustration of why planning and preparation and clear roles and responsibilities are so important. Everyone is familiar with the 35 bridge collapse, but most of us probably don't realize how complex the scene was. And as I skip through, you can see a variety of components of that event and all the jurisdictions that played a role and how they ended up needing to be coordinated together. So it took an enormous set and a variety of organizations and responses, each with their individual roles under an overall integrated plan. Finally, for me, under operational continuity is a third component that assures the primary mission and essential functions of the university are able to continue in spite, through, and following an emergency. We've identified critical units and services that without which the university cannot operate at its basic level. You can see examples of utilities, housing services, food, 911 response. We do this through what we call COOPs, or continuity of operation plans, that specify all the activities that are necessary to happen, and in the case of an emergency, how they will adapt and adjust to make sure that service is still provided. Though the university service often leads the campus in this part of the effort, operationally, we rely heavily on your relations as a lead response when it comes to the vital part of communications. And so now I want to turn over the presentation to Vice President Kramer to talk about crisis response to events and situations.
All right, thank you very much. And Vice President Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Vice President Bertelsen. As you might suspect, communications is an integral part of any emergency response. University Relations plans with and trains with university services in every incident management that Mike has talked about, the multiple training sessions. There's always a university relations person there because communications is part of the NIMS infrastructure, the National Incident Management System. We're extraordinarily fortunate at the University of Minnesota to not only have that process and that procedure ingrained in university relations, but to have the university's Chief Public Relations Officer, Chuck Tombarge, who has noted professional expertise in emergency management, both in his private sector experience and while here at the University of Minnesota. I'll now turn this over to Public Relations Officer Chuck Tombarge.
Thank you, Vice President Kramer, Chair Cohen, and members of the committee. This slide talks a little bit about the issue spectrum, and this is something that guides our thinking about the way we communicate for issues and crises at the university. It's also heavily rooted in research done by Harvard Kennedy School and Business School experts who have done case studies and taken a close look at crisis situations across the country and how organizations respond, and frankly, which responses are most successful. And so they have developed this spectrum that guides our thinking. And on the left side of the screen, you see routine events. These are events that certainly rise to the occasion of attracting attention. They may impact an organization's reputation, but frankly, they're a little more predictable. I might use the example of a fire as an example. We all know if you see a fire, you call 911, the fire department responds, they are trained in certain ways to respond, and if they respond quickly and timely enough, using the skills that they've trained on, chances are pretty good the end will be successful. The fire will be put out. However, on the right side of the screen, you see issues that become true crises or catastrophes, and these would qualify as incidents that really can define someone's career or an organization's trajectory. These are the issues that we're most worried about in terms of the university's reputation, because they can really rock our values to the core. This, for example, might be an active shooter on campus. Highly unpredictable, though we can train for it in a lot of respects, we really cannot anticipate what we are going to need to communicate in that incident because it is so unpredictable. And the line between these types of incidents is this idea of novelty. And the research shows actually that novelty is characterized by a number of things. These are incidents that are risky, uncertain, rapid, and all of the other characteristics you see here. On the routine issues, we can plan for those. And in fact, in many cases, we've actually scripted communications responses for those incidents. In these cases, we need to work through the infrastructure that Vice President Burleson pointed out to work through these unpredictable situations. The point of novelty is really important, because if a situation changes and we don't change our corresponding response, it's going to very quickly get away from us. Overall, novel situations have a large scale. They tend to be unprecedented, again, very unpredictable, and they're really complex. They're probably not something university relations is responding to on its own, but it is going to require a university-wide or even community-wide response. And what's important for all of us as leaders in these situations is to really set real expectations for the result. These are incidents where we are working hard to make good enough decisions, provide timely enough communications and action so that people can take action in many cases to keep themselves safe. And it's about doing the best you can in the moment, again, not knowing what the next moment will bring. So we take a number of steps to prepare for these unpredictable situations. In communications especially, but in all of the university's response, we need to diversify the information that's coming into us. It's why you see in the NIM structure so many different disciplines at the table. Everyone brings a different perspective, everyone brings different expertise, and for our message, that is really important because the university has such a wide array of stakeholders who are all going to focus on different aspects. We also do our planning based on capabilities. You don't know who's going to be out sick or on vacation when something bad happens. So our plans never are person-specific, they are role-specific. And we practice those to make sure that our awareness and ability within the university relations team is broad and deep at the same time. We also, and it's one of the strengths of the NIM structure, but also the way we attack communications, we make sure that we have clarity around how we're going to make these decisions in the moment. who needs to be looped into a statement? What is kind of the hierarchy of approval process that we need to follow? Again, we don't know what we're going to have to say in these unpredictable situations, so we need to have clarity and a foundation in the process so that we can act as quickly as possible. It's also important that in our leadership, but also in our message, we are adaptive to the situation. I often talk to departments and colleges around, start the draft statement around the values of your department, college, and the institution as a whole. The values exist in these emergency situations to give us a foundation. And they're important, not only to communicate, but to guide our actions. If what we say differs completely from what we're actually doing, the public is going to very quickly notice the discrepancy, and that's going to affect the trust and credibility that we have as an institution, particularly in these high-profile situations. Honesty, transparency, trustworthiness, respect, all very important in the long game of reputation building for the university or any organization. We also focus communications a lot on how to integrate stakeholders. Higher education in many ways is so different than any other organization in existence. We have a lot of similarities, for example, in some of our business aspects, but our stakeholder groups are so diverse. Not only do we have customers in students, we have their parents who have a very different set of expectations of what we're going to deliver. We've got donors, we've got alumni, we have policymakers who have influence and make decisions about our funding. We have the general public, and in many ways we talk about Minnesotans having a passion for the university, which in positive times is really helpful. In these high-profile emergencies, they can cause us considerable risk because everyone feels like they have some ownership in what we're doing. And so we need to take all of those stakeholders into account and make sure that we're speaking to them. And it really reinforces in these incidents this one size does not fit all in terms of communications. In an emergency, we are focusing on the people most impacted first and going out from there, but we need to take everyone into account. And then the final point I'd make in terms of both communications and overall response in general is this importance to ensure surge capacity. Again, these high-profile situations are very unpredictable and can get big very quickly if we aren't ahead of them. And some of these instances, like active shooter instances on thankfully other campuses and not ours, have shown that these incidences are not just hours long, minutes long. They take weeks, months, sometimes years to cycle through when you're thinking about recovery, when you're thinking about putting up a memorial in light of what has happened. And so for communications people and everyone responding to these things, we need to be aware that our existing teams may be maxed out in these instances. So we spend some of our time training communicators across the system and making sure that there's expertise and an ability to tap our central resources in these instances so that we can keep each other fresh and on the ball. With that, I'll turn it back to Vice President Kramer to wrap us up.
Thank you, Chuck. I would only reiterate the importance that crisis communications is a discipline and that university relations is an integral part of the training that Mike's team puts on. We believe strongly that that training builds that muscle memory of how to deal with the routine crisis so that we're better prepared for the novel crisis. Madam Chair, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, and welcome to President Kaler to the committee. Are there any questions from the committee? Comments, questions? Yes, Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I mean, first of all, I want to thank all the presenters. I think that when the committee worked with Chief Auditor Klatt on the key risk areas, and I think that this was precisely the kind of conversation that we hoped that would trigger very deep on how we're mitigating. And so my compliments to you. I think the work you've done is very good. It's very comprehensive. I appreciate, that there's a focus on disaster preparedness, and I understand why. I also appreciate the exercises that you do, which I think is key to keeping everybody on their toes, frankly, and also to continue to get better. So I mean, I very much appreciate the work you're doing here. I have a couple of questions. I guess the area that an area that concerns me is sort of the more mundane area of, and I think Mr. Tombarsh, you mentioned the kids and their parents, and so I'm curious and maybe a bit concerned about how do our students, when they're injured, they get hurt on campus, do we keep data on what those sort of mundane everyday risks are? I don't know whether it's mostly kids on the bike or excessive alcohol or whatever. Do we keep that data, and does that help us? And also, I am also just concerned about reputationally about we are in an urban area, and just people muggings and robberies and these kinds of things, which for a variety of reasons, really greatly concern me. And how do we? I guess the question there is, do we have enough? Are there enough cameras? Is there enough training? Are we doing everything we can really to keep that to a minimum? So those are the two questions: data, and then just sort of everyday criminality, and how we're working to mitigate that.
Madam Chair, Regent Powell, let me try to answer those things. I won't have a complete answer for you today. I'd say from a data perspective, we keep there's a lot of information we do keep, and frankly, it's one of my targets is with public safety and emergency management is to create a better uniform set of things that we target. So that no matter we get a lot of sort of one-off questions about this or that, and it's hard to have every possible data set for every possible mapping situation, but for us to be very clear on what are the things that we think are most important that help us plan for and give us a clue of where we think we're going. So let us decide what is the best metric for that. And so we need, I think, we use standard state, national sort of reports about Part 1 and Part 2 crime. We keep that information for a long time. We track all the major incidents, emergencies. In fact, there's a group that meets routinely on a monthly basis to review what those, after we track them, what happened, what do we learn from them. So there's a lot of data kept in a couple of different places. As it comes to capacity, it's always the difficult answer to say, how are we doing? Are we safe enough? And of course, the right answer is, as long as there's an event happening, obviously that's not enough. We do that with trying to be reality-based, that we are an enormous, large campus with a significant number of people, and that exists in a major metropolitan area. So it's so the realist part of me acknowledges that there will be events and crimes that happen. I can say that relative to the city of Minneapolis, the percent of crime for the number of people we have here is very small. So our ratios from a crime per incident per person for what happens on campus is quite small relative to the city that we exist in. That's not to say that we aren't giving into that. I'd say we've continued to make progress and investments in this area. We've gone from a couple hundred cameras to well over 3,000. We're updating from one kind of camera to a digital camera. We are tracking and prioritizing which of those we do on what sort of basis. We are continuing to address what our staffing plan is and how we integrate with the city of Minneapolis, so that what do we do ourselves, because we aren't going to staff ourselves out of this totally, because the majority of our students live off campus. So we don't have that reach, and we need to depend and have a good relationship, and we continue to enhance that relationship with the city of both Minneapolis and St. Paul. So that's a partial answer to your question. I am working on, as we speak, sort of a multi-year public safety plan. What do we think should be our targets, and what's our incremental steps to get there? So we've created an outline, and we are just sort of at the cusp of sort of thinking, much as we do a 6-year capital plan, a multi-year public safety plan for the campus.
Thank you.
All right, Regent Lucas, and then we'll move on to our next item.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I just have a real specific question about cameras. I know the difference between an old camera and a new camera that's digital and ready to go. And you talked about 3,000 cameras in our, our program to upgrade them. I'm just wondering how far along we are on that, because that can be just night and day in terms of how we watch.
Madam Chair, Regent Lucas, I don't have that number in my head. We have a long way to go. Is what I'd say. Is we have prioritized where the places that are most important, because we have many cameras, some which are, don't have a high frequency need, in the steam tunnels, for example. Mostly it's to know something happened, but it doesn't require the same level of digitization that you might in a larger public space. So we are prioritizing where we do those. So the part of this effort we have is we are frankly, there's multiple steps to, the easy part is just to replace the camera, but each camera that we put in place comes with something like a 10-fold volume of data storage. So we're working closely with OIT to figure out what's the best way to store that information, the best way that we can retrieve it, as well as the camera replacement and location. So it's, we are having a multi-pronged sort of review of how do we move to that whole next tier. But we can get you that data.
Is that HEAPR? Is that considered HEAPR?
No, we have not used HEAPR for this. That we have a separate annual fund for campus security infrastructure, and we have an amount that we set a number of years ago that was created, and we plan that on a multi-year basis and set a year priorities, just like we do for the rest of the capital within that fund. On occasion, we then will add resources to it to achieve certain targets and based on need.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And Chief Auditor Klatt has one comment to make as we close this portion.
I just want to make the committee aware or remind you that these topics were identified at your September Audit Committee meeting. And so I reached out to Mr. Bertelsen and Kramer to request that they participate in this, and they responded without hesitation, which I think, considering the quality of their information, indicates that they do indeed have their fingers on the pulse of these risks and are well prepared to be responsive to them. And so thank you for being so gracious and in agreeing to be here today.
Yes, we appreciate it very, very much, not only in your being here, but in the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, on to our next item. And so Senior Vice President Burnett and Vice President Brown, we're interested to hear from you. And Chief Auditor Klatt, do you have any introductions to do? Statement?
Regent Cohen, members of the committee, as you are well aware, we issued an audit report on our review of the university's compliance with the employment eligibility verification requirements established by Homeland Security, commonly known to as I-9 processing. In that, we found that the university had a fairly large error rate in terms of its compliance with documentation and timeliness. We did not, and this is very important to point out, we did not identify any, and nor has the administration in their follow-up work identified any individual employed at the university who should not have been employed, which is, what this is all about. But indeed, there are still regulatory implications with lack of an effective process to promote, again, the compliance with documentation and timeliness. The administration has been very responsive to the audit findings and has put in a significant amount of work to, again, continue to dimension the problem, determine where our remediation is necessary, and how to improve compliance going forward. And so I think you will find their discussion of this work very interesting.
Okay, welcome to the committee. I'm not sure which one of you is going to start things off.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, members of the Audit Committee. I'll start off and then hand off to Vice President Brown. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with the administration's response to this audit. We have prepared an update on our ongoing efforts to be fully compliant with the federal requirements regarding employment eligibility verification using the I-9 form. We take these requirements very seriously and are eager to share more information with the Regents about what the university has learned over the past few months and our increased efforts to achieve compliance goals. We will spend a few minutes reviewing the federal requirements and how the University of Minnesota approaches this process as a system. Next, we will discuss the key issues identified in the internal audit in August, and additionally, the Office of Human Resources conducted a deeper dive into the results by thoroughly examining records across our system. Based on the internal audit results and OHR's analysis, several opportunities were identified to improve compliance, and an update of efforts to date will be provided. Opportunities to remediate existing issues have been identified as part of our risk mitigation strategy, and we will provide an update on what this process entails. And finally, we will share key insights we've learned along the way with an overview of near-term and long-term strategies to ensure compliance across the university. And now Vice President Brown will share this update with you. Thank you.
Okay, Vice President Brown.
There you go.
Regent Cohen, members of the committee, Auditor Klatt, let me just first start out by echoing Senior Vice President Burnett's comments that we are fully committed to compliance in this area, and we are working very hard to get there. We have welcomed the audit results and are particularly helpful to us following the installation of our PeopleSoft system to ensure that our processes are effective in reaching compliance. I'll start with just a little review of the federal law. In 1986, the Immigration and Control Act established that employers must verify the employment eligibility of all new hires and rehires using the I-9 form. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which oversees the two-part form, has very strict requirements for employers and employees in submitting this I-9 form. The first part can be completed on or before the first day of work, while the second part, which requires the employer to review and certify documentation related to citizenship and employment eligibility, must be completed by the end of the third workday. Within the University of Minnesota, this process has been handled in two ways. First, for U.S. citizens, it is decentralized to academic and administrative units, and they are required to communicate this information to new employees and administer the process within the timeline required. Second, it is centralized for foreign national students and scholars in the Office of Human Resources, given the complexity of the requirements around their compliance. Internal audits used detailed sampling methods to assess compliance by the university with the federal I-9 requirement. The testing performed did not detect any university employees not authorized to work in the United States. And I know Auditor Gail Klatt emphasized that, but I want to emphasize that also. The audit did uncover administrative errors related to I-9 compliance that require immediate attention. The two primary issues are, first, most of the errors were a failure to complete both sections of the I-9 within the required deadlines. Second issue was related to start dates of employees and is part of a result of the upgrade of the system. Starting in 2009, the university moved to an online system to support completion of the first part of the I-9 form, Section 1. This is called I-9 Express. This I-9 system is integrated with the government's E-Verify system, which helps in ascertaining that the identification documentation is accurate. In some cases, the employment start date entered into the I-9 Express system were inconsistent with the start date entered into the PeopleSoft system, our human resource management system. Following the audit's report to us, we conducted a thorough review to better understand these audit results. Academic and administrative unit, human resource leaders and staff were critical partners in the process of reviewing thousands of records. We went back and looked at all paper I-9 records from November 1986 to May of 2009, when our process moved online with I-9 Express. Then we searched the online records from 2009 to the present. We analyzed the data by employee group, campus, college, and unit. We conducted a root cause analysis to better understand the underlying factors driving any non-compliance. Additionally, we benchmarked our overall I-9 processes against the procedures and practices of 9 of 14 of our Big Ten peers. Our data review and analysis again confirmed the findings of the audit in that we found no university employees not authorized to work in the United States. Additionally, our review found that the timeliness of completion of both parts of the I-9 form is a primary issue related to compliance. This is a law that is not forgiving in its nature. It doesn't have a very broad area of moderation here. There are several unique elements of the university as a workplace that make timeliness issues challenging. This includes a range of schedules for various units and departments. For example, some operate on a Monday through Friday schedule. Some operate on a 7-day-a-week schedule. We have multiple shifts, day through second and third shifts, which makes calculating the date for completing Part 2 of the I-9 challenging. Also, many student workers do not arrive on campus necessarily thinking they would take a job or have the necessary identification documents with them. The university seeks to operate with integrity, and we have focused on setting the expectation that everyone involved in the hiring process will comply with the Immigration Control Act. We understand that this effort to be in full compliance is an ongoing one that requires us to focus on quality and developing strategies to ensure compliance. To address the timeliness issue, we have moved to a new standard that all university faculty, staff, and student workers must have completed their I-9 form, both sections 1 and 2, on or before the end of their first day of work for pay. So this is a more aggressive standard than required by the federal law. For simplicity, we call this our Day 1 standard, and we believe that this will make an impact on our timeliness. However, our process does vary somewhat depending upon whether the faculty, staff, or student worker is a U.S. citizen, a remote employee, or a foreign national. Moving forward, we plan to focus our efforts on 5 levers of control, the first being senior leadership. Our senior leaders have fully supported the goal of achieving full I-9 compliance. This has started with President Kaler and his efforts just even this week to send a letter of direction in this regard. They have been briefed and have fully supported this effort, including monitoring and consequences. The second lever is process training and communication. We very quickly adopted this Day 1 standard and developed training and communication to elevate awareness across the institution. Monitoring tools have been developed to provide senior leaders with ongoing monthly feedback regarding the timeliness of compliance to the Day 1 standard within their academic or administrative college or unit. We are in month 2 of those reporting and still refining that reporting and improving it. Consequences for noncompliance will be put into place. The president sent letters to the community, as I just said, and we will monitor this progress closely. We will be asking for all units to come forward in their budget or contract process and talk with us about the compliance with the I-9 standard. Testing overall I-9 compliance will be regularly reviewed to determine if additional improvements are needed. While we have focused most of our efforts on going forward, there are some remediation efforts that we can do. Federal law allows employers to correct existing I-9 forms to address clerical or other minor errors. We are putting these remediation efforts in place to address all errors in our paper I-9 forms for our current faculty and staff. We have identified and located all of these forms, which were completed between 1986 and 2009, and are beginning to correct them as needed. Once remediated, the corrected paper forms will be moved into our online I-9 Express system. This system has safeguards that prevent common errors. So from 2009 going forward, that system has in place and has already addressed some of that. So there's less remediation needed for that period of time, and also ensures that going forward, we have fewer correctable errors. The only thing I would mention is timeliness is not a correctable error in the eyes of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And that's why we're placing such emphasis on the one-day internal standard to avoid timeliness problems going forward. We have done a lot of work to date. We have reviewed the I-9 records. As I said, that totals 64,179 records. Of these records, we determined that 54,679 are in I-9 Express, and we had about 9,500 in paper that we are moving into PDF and will be using an electronic process to review those and ensure that they are compliant. We established our day one standard, updated all university hiring documents. We created 41 and updated 41 different template letters and checklists to ensure that new hires are informed of the day one standard. And that is also a good reminder to all of the administrators out in colleges and units. To ensure the community was aware of this, we developed training and communication resources. We held 4 meetings with HR leads and I-9 administrators. We developed an online training session for I-9 administrators on the day one standard, plus training resources for hiring managers and newly hired employees. We distributed a number of communications as listed on the slide. So we have been very busy in making sure that this is well understood across our campus and that compliance is expected. 3 lessons stand out as we look back on our process. First, President Kaler, Provost Hanson, Senior Vice President Burnett, our chancellors, our deans, our vice presidents, along with their respective HR leads, have been invaluable partners in helping us to quickly define the scope of the issue and begin taking steps to remediate it. We greatly appreciate their help and support in this very serious compliance issue. Second, this effort requires that we reach out and make clear communications to thousands of people on our campuses, everyone from senior leaders to human resource staff, to payroll administrators, to hiring managers, and to new hires and even prospective employees. That our expectation is that all new hires complete both parts of the I-9 before day one. We know that we will need to continually communicate this new standard so that each incoming student and newly hired faculty and staff member is aware and ready to meet this expectation. Third, the standards set by the Immigration Service are rigorous, with no exceptions made for size or complexity of an organization and its workforce. The government expectation is 100% compliance, which requires us to be diligent in our remediation, monitoring, testing, and communications, and we are fully committed to that effort. In the near term, we are focusing on bringing the university to the day one standard, so we would be in full compliance with the federal law. Our training and communications efforts, which support a shift in culture, are ongoing. We are continually looking to expand our communications and outreach, and particularly reach incoming students and parents, as that was an area where students were really unprepared to meet the requirements of the I-9 documentation. We are working on remediation efforts, a key strategy to mitigate risk and taking steps to address all fixable errors on our paper I-9 records. Our long-term focus is to establish a culture of I-9 compliance using our Day 1 standard. We know that our faculty and staff are very committed to their work here at the university, and we are optimistic that they will see our I-9 standard as part of ensuring the quality and integrity of our institution. What we know is that we need to continue to do better, and we have applied our efforts to diligent improvement. We have not found that we hired anyone that we should not have, and we are seeing improvements in timeliness and data accuracy, and we will continue to address issues promptly as they arise and increase our processes in their efforts to be in full compliance as needed. And with that, I'll be happy to receive any questions.
Okay. Well, first, President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I've had my front feet in this problem here, too, and I thought it might just be of interest to the committee to have a little color about stories from the units about why we can be out of compliance. So this is from VetMed, which was a key barrier outside of our control, I'm quoting. It's sometimes physically impossible for foreign nationals to travel from the St. Paul campus to ISSS, which is on the West Bank, to the Social Security office in St. Paul, Minneapolis, or Brooklyn Park, to OHR payroll on the East Bank, and then back to VetMed HR all on their first day if they are part of the orientation to the VetMed work in the morning of their first day. So it's that kind of stuff that we're dealing with, and there are, for every non-compliance issue we have, there is a story about why that is. So it's this kind of granularity that we are driving our folks to get, and believe me, they are getting it. But just thought you might be interested in how that's going to happen.
Right. Sounds pretty complicated. All right. Are there questions, comments from the committee members? Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, and I signaled I wanted to speak before President Kaler added that piece of explanatory reality, but I'll ask first of all, I'll ask a question, but first of all, this is never something a board member or a president or anyone wants to see is audit results like this. These are severe and significant, and that isn't the point of my comment. My comment is I appreciate ownership and responsibility for the problem and a team-oriented approach to getting it solved. So I do appreciate that. There's quite a bit of transparency here and what appears to me to be a real deep commitment to get this resolved. Here's my question. You're aiming for and ultimately looking at a culture of compliance and getting to a place where we are doing considerably better, but I continued to hear Vice President Brown, you use terms, we expect, we have an expectation, and at what point in this process do those words become, mandatory, zero tolerance, and therein lies perhaps President Kaler's added piece that before you can get to using, this is mandatory, there is no option to not do this. We've got to deal with the realities of the situation we face and help me understand at what point, if ever, do you go beyond, sitting with an employer, a supervisor that we expect you to get this done to expectations aren't enough. Delivering has got to happen. So does that make sense?
Vice President Brown.
If you don't mind, Chair Cohen, Regent McMillan, I'll shortstop that because we recognize that this has been a serious lapse. I strongly believe we do have a culture of compliance. We do follow the rules, certainly as we execute on our research mission. There are human foibles, of course, and those happen in an organization our size. But we have incumbent upon us as leaders to put in place the processes that people can execute and do what we expect them to do. And we have leaders, as leaders, have failed on the margins of some of these issues, the example I just gave you being one. But also as leaders, we own the responsibility to have our employees follow the law. And we have made it exceptionally clear, Vice President Brown's a little Minnesotan in her expectation, that this is not a suggestion or an option. You will do this. And as we've now improved our surveillance of the situation and made this an element for discussion in the annual budget compacts with the deans, there will be consequences for repeated noncompliance with this, up to and including termination of your employment with the University of Minnesota. We have made this very clear that it is not an option. To the extent that we should have and could have done that sooner and better, you're absolutely correct in making that criticism. One of the healthy virtues of the audit process we have is that it surfaces these kind of issues and enables us to get better, and we're in the process of doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Follow-up, Regent Cohen?
Oh, Vice President Brown and then Regent McMillan.
Yes, Regent Cohen and Regent McMillan and members of the committee. The other thing that we have put in place is we have emphasized that an employee cannot work until they have the I-9 completed. And I think that was a little softer out in the units than it should have been. They were eager to hire somebody, get them started, and thought, well, we'll finish this up as we go. And we have really emphasized that in the trainings that we have done, that you cannot allow these individuals to work until their I-9 is completed.
Okay, Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, and thank you, President Kaler and Vice President Brown. Again, my opening comment, I want to emphasize, I'm not about, culpability or looking back. This is about a forward-looking solution, and I really appreciate your answer, President Kaler, and yours in addition. So thank you.
Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Thank you, presenters. And thank you for all the efforts that are going in on this topic. It is important. Seems though it's been around since 1986. And probably went into some kind of heightened mode in 2001 after 9/11. I'm glad that we caught it now. I'm just curious as to why it took so long for us to determine that we had a problem. And then I'd like to know, how do we know if we're in compliance, in full compliance, and then how do we know if we're staying in compliance? Because it seems like it's very complicated and not really running through any one computer system where we can get a report on what's really going on.
All right, 3 questions. Who would like to tackle those? Senior Vice President Burnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regent Hsu and members, how did we get here? I mean, there could be a number of different things. This organization grew organically and decentralized in multiple places across the state. My view is that this is a very, very decentralized organization, and how do you bring standards to adherence on key things like this? So this is a teachable moment, not just for the I-9 standard, it's a teachable moment for some other things with respect to data integrity. To your question about how do we know we're doing better, we're now getting monthly reports that are sent to every leader about how we did the prior month on meeting the day 1 standard. And oh, by the way, they can see each other's data. So if a unit didn't hire anyone that month, it's NA. If a unit met the day 1 standard, they're at 100% in the column. We saw our first report for August. We've now seen a report for September. And oh, by the way, leaders can see how other units are doing, because it's not just your data. It's all that we organize it by the resource responsibility centers, which are about 50 at this university, the 4 system campuses and 46 other units that make up the Twin Cities campus. So I would share with you, yes, we're putting in data. We're learning how to interpret it. And the president to this week said, we've seen those first reports since we responded to this audit, put this new tool in place, put this new expectation and training in place. We've made remarkable progress, but it's still not good enough. And oh, by the way, there will be consequences if it's not. And so the second piece we put in the audit response is every unit has to come in front of the budget committee, which is the provost, myself, the vice president of research, associate vice president Tonneson, and the vice president of medical, Jacob Toller. We do this every year, and part of their budget review process is I-9 compliance. And to the point, getting attention starts with resources and accountability. So we've got several layers to work on this. I think we've seen marked improvements. Are we where we need to be yet? I would say no, but are we really in a good place to get there? I'd say absolutely. So I can't comment on the last 20 years, but I can certainly comment on the last 20 weeks of what we've been doing since we received the audit response. And I think this is a piece of changing a culture and helping them understand that this is not optional.
Follow-up, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. Senior Vice President Burnett, thank you for that response. So there is one computer system that generates these reports, I assume, and then if you could go into a little bit more about how do we know, I know part of the process, the remediation process is going back and making sure we're compliant for the last 32 years. How do we know when that's going to be completed, or will we know if it's completed?
Regent Cohen, Chair Cohen, if I could have Vice President Brown and her staff are doing the remediation process, if I could ask her to comment on that one. But she does update me on how that progress is going.
Mm-hmm. Chair Cohen, Regent Hsu, we are in the process of working with our vendor, which is I-9 Express. We are putting together a separate contract for this remediation work in addition to our ongoing contract with them. It will probably take about I would say 2 to 3 months, depending upon how everything falls in place, to upload all of the PDFs of 9,500 paper copies that we have, run them through their system, which looks not only for are they in compliance, but applies the rules that were in effect on the date that the form was created. And then will let us know if there's any remediation that needs to be done or can be done. Some of it may be correcting an address or something like that. And then we will go back and actually talk to individual employees to make sure that we have the proper information on the form. So it's a process that will be continuing really from now probably through the end of this calendar year.
Thank you.
Okay, and Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. So I want to just continue on a little bit in the line of questioning that Regent Hsu has initiated. And it sort of has to do with this idea that, this is a teaching moment. And it was, once we did the audit, and we found out about it, we were able to move, I think, very quickly and effectively. But I guess the question is for our chief auditor. That is, as you reflect on this, are there lessons that we can learn in terms of where we choose to deploy our audit resources? I mean, this was a case of highly decentralized, big penalties, risks of non-compliance. There were certain characteristics, and this is meant to be a constructive question. Are there ways that the audit team can apply, sort of those factors and to help maybe shine light on some areas that we otherwise would not have?
Regent Cohen, Chair Cohen, Regent Powell, that's our goal all the time, is to find the spots where the institution may warrant some improvement. I would say it's there's many moving parts within the University of Minnesota, and the state of individual activities changes almost constantly. So identifying specifically those areas, or providing units with the opportunity to address, as I said, with our SNAP audits, find those things that you think could be problematic, go and look specifically at that, get information back to that business process owner very quickly. That's part of that intent, is to get remediation starting earlier rather than waiting for, when that unit cycles back through an audit process. And to be honest, the University of Minnesota is a very large, complex organization, and we have fairly limited audit resources. And so we have to be thoughtful about how we deploy those.
Okay, President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. If I could just add to Auditor Klatt's observation, the Willie Sutton observation, right? He robbed banks because that's where the money was. And so we need to audit where the money is and where the penalties are. And this is a case that, frankly, we probably could have got out earlier. But this area, federal employment compliance, indirect cost allocations and spending, elements of criminal background, managing the health and welfare of human subjects. These are the high-profile things that you as a committee think about carefully as you put together your audit work plan. And, this is a teachable moment of how important that allocation of our precious audit resources against where significant problems can be needs to be weighed carefully every year as you set forward.
Okay, well, this was a very good discussion. We appreciate your close attention to this matter and the information that you shared with us and the work you're doing on it. So thank you very much. All right, we just have a few minutes left for the last half of the internal audit update.
Thank you. I was going to move there, but in the interest of time, Fareed from my staff is going to manage my technology there. But so this is really a follow-up to the discussion that we had at our last meeting on the landscape of internal audit findings, and I just want to take 2 minutes to kind of level set again about that presentation. And what it was an analysis we did of the last 3 years of audit results and findings to identify where there are predominance of findings that indicate potential for improvement within the institution. Again, I began that presentation last month, reminding the committee that the university is generally well controlled, but there are pockets of activity which could benefit from control improvement. I also, and this lines up very well with this most current presentation on I-9s, the decentralized activities are just more difficult to consistently control to an expected outcome. They just are. You can utilize some system edits to try to drive that, and I think that in this case we're going to find that that's to be the case, and decentralized activities benefit from robust centralized monitoring, which you also saw as a new initiative undertaken at particularly this problem, but that exists for other decentralized areas as well. And monitoring has not been a strong suit of the university. It's just the culture hasn't lent itself to that. So from my perch as the chief auditor, the fact that in this particular case, we've identified the value of that monitoring, perhaps now we will see greater opportunities to implement similar oversight on other of our activities as well. So as a result of this, and are looking at where we've had the most findings and where there are what we perceive to be the greatest opportunity for remediation that would have a very strong institutional impact, we identified several, I think there were 11 opportunities in the areas of human resources, IT, compliance, contracting, financial, and scholarships in the student area. So, and I can go into those if you want, but the feedback was the committee had additional questions or observations about this that you wanted time to discuss. So I really want to open it up to you to have that conversation, and I'll be responsive to your questions.
All right, are there any comments or questions from the committee? I have a feeling that perhaps having sat through a 3-hour meeting and then immediately coming to this meeting, that maybe they're thinking about lunch rather than their question. Are there any questions or comments about this? Regent Powell?
I'll offer a comment. It's really sort of a platitude, but in my prior life, in my prior industry, by far the largest competitor and company in the space, who was by far the biggest, also by far the most decentralized. And their lament was, we're a big company that behaves like a lot of small companies. And they had the worst disasters, as a result, really, and you would think, how could this happen, in such an impressive, well led. And so, I guess, like I said, it's a platitude, but I think this theme of decentralization, and it doesn't say you have to centralize everything, but just sort of being aware of the risks that poses for us in many different ways, perhaps maybe is just a helpful mindset and context that we bring to many of these areas, because I've just seen it again and again in my own business life. This is where bad things can really happen.
It's just, again, decentralized activities. There's many really valid reasons for them to be handled decentrally, but they are very difficult to control to an expected outcome. And especially, we're not just decentralized that one person in a unit does something. We have 50 people in a unit that do something. And so the degree of decentralization, and this is, my perception, Vice President Brown might disagree with me, but I don't think she does. This is a challenge in the HR space, that it is very atomized almost beyond decentralized, and that's a lot of people to train in very complicated activities with a fairly complex system. It's a challenge for sure. So, but it requires, again, consistent emphasis on doing it right, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chief Auditor Klatt, for all the information you brought to us. Thank you, committee members, for the questions and comments, and the meeting is adjourned.